Today, I want you to think about a time when you have failed, when things didn't go the way that you planned. Oftentimes, we think failure is the opposite of success, but it's actually not. Failure is part of the path towards success. And so, this lesson, we're going through chapter 14, where Napoleon Hill talks all about failure and what is failure. And he actually goes through and explains his life. And there were 7 turning points in his life that, from the outside looking in, and even in his own life, he described these turning points as failures. But the more he progressed, the more he learned about success, they actually became part of his story, a powerful part of his story. The most fascinating thing that I have picked up as we've studied through this book and have gone through all of the lessons, we have just a handful more to go through. But the thing that I have learned as we've been going through this is there are so many little one-liners and things that over the last 100 years we have picked up and have just kept going. Like the customer is always right. That came from Napoleon Hill. Things like failure is an opportunity. That came from Napoleon Hill. And so when we look at these little things that we have been taught for so long, that we've studied when it comes to sales, when it comes to entrepreneurship and running your own business, all of these things, so many of them can be brought back to what Napoleon Hill taught. But the thing that has been amazing to go through and research is that we learned the little nuggets, but what we didn't pick up was the lessons that came from it, the foundation of what taught him those principles. And we're missing a huge part of what he was trying to explain because we don't understand the foundation. So as I went through and I read this chapter and I listened to his story about failure and how he came to the conclusion that failure is an opportunity, I wanted to pull out 5 lessons that I learned about failure and that I can see in my own life, that I'll share a few stories that I can see in other entrepreneurs' lives and clients that I've worked with. And so when we look at these, as we go through these lessons, I want you to think about your own life. Think about the times when you had failed, and have you seen these lessons show up in your life? So the first lesson that we're going to go through is Napoleon Hill came to this conclusion that failure is an opportunity. But everything that I've studied about the brain, failure is actually not an opportunity. Failure is a perspective. If you think about, when you think about what is an opportunity, you think of things that make you excited, that there's a new chapter coming or that there's possibilities. But when we face failure, your brain doesn't go to that point. It goes to, I'm not doing enough. It goes to, this is never going to work out. It goes to, things are just too hard. Whatever narrative your brain comes up with, you aren't going into a space of saying, this situation that feels really uncomfortable and is not desirable, these are opportunities for me to be able to grow. We don't go there automatically. Now, you could go through and reprogram your brain and get to a point where you are constantly saying, yes, like failure is an opportunity, but that's not a natural place. And it takes a lot of effort, because what happens in your brain is when we have something negative, we consciously think if we can flip that into a positive, then everything is going to work out better. But your brain doesn't actually do that. It will reject the positive because there's a belief that supports the negative thing. And so we tend to beat ourselves up, especially as entrepreneurs and coaches. We end up beating ourselves up because I can't think positive the way that I want to. I don't go there naturally. That's because your brain's not wired to go there. If we only try to be positive 100% of the time, then we're actually missing out on different opportunities. And so when we look at failure is an opportunity. Yes, it can be an opportunity, but more often than not, failure is a perception. It's the way that you are thinking about the situation. Because we can go through and look at this failure in a couple of different ways that allows us to see it as an opportunity. But failure is always a perspective. When you allow yourself to feel the hurt or the betrayal or the uncomfortable feelings that come with failure, allow yourself to have that perspective and then say, okay, I don't want to stay here. What's the new perspective that I want to have at this? Then we can go in and say, failure is an opportunity. What am I learning from all of this? Where am I going that's going to help me be better? And when we can go at that place and recognize that failure is always your perspective, how you're coming at the situation, then that's going to allow us the space to feel what we need to feel, then transform it into, okay, what is a different perspective that I want to take this situation at? And that allows us to be able to come into the next point. So the second lesson that I learned as I went through and read about Napoleon Hill's life on failure is that failure actually doesn't exist at all. Failure isn't real in the way that we define failure. Failure only exists when you accept a temporary defeat as something that's permanent. It goes back to that idea that it is a perspective. If you accept that this temporary setback is something that is going to be here all the time, that's when failure comes into existence. If you can recognize this is a temporary setback, this is something that is uncomfortable in the moment and isn't desirable, but it's not going to last forever. That's going to help you step into a place where we can shift that perspective. So we can move into a space where we can shift that perspective. We can move into something different because we're recognizing that this moment is a temporary defeat, not something that is permanent. Napoleon Hill says, nothing is impossible to the person who knows what it is that he wants and makes up his mind to acquire it. If you recognize that this temporary setback is just leading me to the next thing that I need to learn in order to be able to create what it is that I want to create, then you can step into that place where it really is possible for you to create anything that you desire. When you recognize this is only a temporary defeat, not anything permanent. And if you stay in that place that this is a temporary defeat, then that failure doesn't ever exist. And you can continue to move forward because we have just these small temporary defeats that are going to help build the character and give us the growth and strength that we are really looking for. Napoleon Hill goes a lot into the law of compensation, which was at his time recently discovered and by Ralph Waldo Emerson. And there was a whole article published about the law of compensation and how the universe maintains this equilibrium of two different sides of this duality, that we have to have failure in order to have success. And we see this in opposites all the time, that there is light and darkness and pleasure and pain. And when we want growth, when we want to gain something, there is that opposite side that gives us that balance between things so that we can maintain this leveledness of everything that we're going through, that we're going to experience both sides. And this is the law of compensation, where we can, for every defeat that we have, that there is something on the other side. We just have to continue moving forward. And this allows us to bring balance into our life, which brings us to the third lesson. So the third lesson is that failure or lessons that we learn from failure rarely are received in the moments when we feel failed, when we feel like we're not moving forward. That's not the time that we're recognizing those lessons, because we're so stuck in that perspective of this is what's happening and things aren't working out, that we can't see the lessons. It requires us to take time to go back and reflect on what has happened. How have I grown? What is different now? If you take the time to reflect more often, instead of doing it once a year or once a quarter, are you taking time to reflect on the things that are happening? This moment where we can go in and say, what am I learning from all of this? This was something that was really hard. Today was really hard. Didn't go the way that I had planned, and it was really hard, but what good came out of it? And this is where a lot of mindset people will start to talk about, like, keeping a gratitude journal and all of those things, which is good. And it's good for you to be able to see that. But when you can take it a step farther and say, today was really hard. What did I learn because of it? Maybe you learn that you have more resilience than you think that you do, that you can do hard things and still do everything else that's on your plate. When you take the time to go back and reflect on what has happened, it gives you that new perspective that you're looking for. I've seen this in my life over and over again. I've had businesses that I've started and completely failed. I've had businesses that I thought was exactly what it is that I needed to do, and then ended up pivoting in the last minute. I've had so many different things that I thought was the right path. That's the reason that I have more than 20 certifications in different modalities, because this is the new thing that is going to lead me to that success that I want. And then when I end up not doing anything with it, it's like, well, that was a waste of money, or that was a waste of time. And when you look at it, every single thing that you do is leading you to where it is that you need to be. But it requires that perspective to go back and say, what is it that I learned because I went through that experience? What are those things that I want to gain because I went through something that was hard? Those things are going to be absolutely critical for you to be able to continue to move forward and change that perspective. Sometimes it is our failures that present the greatest life lessons that you are able to glean from to build that foundation to achieve the success. So lesson 4 is that failure is often a seed of the equivalent success. And so as we go through these failures, as we go through things that are so difficult, we are able to start to plant those seeds that build the foundation. Now, there's been a lot of research on all of this in the last 100 years since Napoleon Hill has written this book. And there was a study done probably about 15 years ago now that it was a study that came out of Harvard. And they went through and studied people who had gone through something really traumatic, whether that was loss or if that was some kind of trauma, somebody who had gone through something that was really difficult. And in their study, as they watched these people over several years, they found that 70% of people who went through something difficult came out and had a positive experience on the other side that matched the depth of their trauma. The opposite became true. 70% of the people, they call this post-traumatic growth. When we have this post-traumatic growth, what that teaches us is that you are actually extremely resilient. When you allow yourself to understand that the trauma that you've been through, the hardship that you've been through, the trials that you go through are all those temporary defeats. And you can stay in that perspective that things are just hard and they're never going to get better. And you're never going to be able to achieve what it is that you're looking for. But the reality is, when you are able to shift the perspective and say, okay, I'm going to learn lessons from the things that I have done. I'm going to change the perspective to look at what opportunities. There's a 70% chance that you will experience success to the opposite degree that you went through those hardships. So when you look at the traumatic things that you've been through, when you look at the hardships and you recognize how heavy those weigh on you, that you have that success waiting for you on the other side that is going to pull you forward. But you have to go in and be able to change that perspective, to look at things differently, to say, I don't want to stay in this mindset of looking at all of the things that are wrong or the things that you've lost, but go in and say, what is it that I need to think about instead? Where can I shift that perspective to look at the situation a little bit differently so that I can make my way towards that success? That brings us to the last lesson. This lesson is all about how life is always propelling you forward. And when we face failure, it only is because you don't want to change. You don't want things to be different. So we resist anything that is going to help us continue to grow. And Napoleon Hill tells an incredible story about this, where he went from one job that paid pretty mediocre, and he, through the principles that we've talked about doing more that you were paid for and showing up for the work and putting in the effort and having the self-confidence, all of those things that we've talked about, he went from this mediocre paying job to a very well-off paying job. And so at the time he was working in a law office, and he started recognizing that all of the things around him, the people that he was working with, the work that he was actually doing, he actually became very stagnant. And he had enough experience that he recognized that that stagnant energy was what happened right before a big failure came. And so he actually quit his job with nothing left this good paying job, because he recognized that he was stagnant. He wasn't growing. And because he left that job, that's actually what led him to start doing his magazine, which was called Hill's Golden Rule. And he reflected on that everyone around him thought, you're crazy. This is a good paying job. You were comfortable. You could do all of the things. And he said that was the problem. He had become comfortable. And instead of that failure coming and taking things from him, he willingly stepped into a place that was uncomfortable in order to be able to create that growth, because life is always moving us forward. And if we resist the change, that's when things happen to us in order to encourage us to continue to move forward. But what Hill learned was that when you recognize that energy, you can find ways to continue to step forward. That doesn't mean everybody needs to go and quit their job, and that you will have to do the same thing that Napoleon Hill did. But that's one thing that he learned, was that life is always moving you forward. And when you take the initiative to say, I want to do something better, whether that is learning a new skill or maybe going in and trying something different, that you are choosing into something that's going to help propel you forward. All of these things are guiding us to a place where you can reach that level of success that you know you are capable of creating. And so it comes down to, are you willing to move forward? Napoleon Hill said this: let us remember that the wheel is always turning. If it brings us sorrow today, it will bring us joy tomorrow. Life is a cycle of varying events, fortunes and misfortunes. It is the fear or the admission of failure that binds us to the shallows and keeps us in misery. We can break free from these ties, turn them into advantages, and make them serve as a tow rope, which will pull us to the shore if we can observe and profit by the lessons that they teach. So, as you have been thinking about your life and the things that have been happening around you, the circumstances that you are in, I want you to remember that there can be times that you don't see a way out, that you don't see how things are different or how they could be different. But remember that it is not permanent. This is a temporary experience that you are going through to guide you to where it is that you need to be. If you can reflect on how far you've come, what it is that you have created, and the momentum that you have picked up because of the experience that you've gone through, that becomes your foundation for what it is that you're looking to build success around. Those hardships, those trials are part of your journey towards success. There are a lot of people who won't invest in someone who hasn't gone through failure before because it teaches you vital lessons in order to be able to create the success that you're looking for. The most important thing that you can learn from success is to continue moving forward. Every success is pushing you in that direction, helping you reach something higher that wasn't available to you before. When we can keep that perspective and continue to move forward, that's what's going to help you be able to create the success in your life that you've been looking for.